Hey, what is going on, guys? Hope you're having a fantastic Sunday. Welcome to the AV Experience. Tonight we got a fun show. We've got Richard Litofsky. Good to see you, Richard. He's the
Hey,
CEO
Michael.
of madVR Labs. Of course, we always have Jonathan and Ryan. Gentlemen, what is happening?
Hey, thanks so much for having me on, guys. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. We're going to be talking about some new stuff that's happening in madVR, talking about pretty much all things madVR. So, guys, if you have questions about madVR Envy, make sure you drop those in the chat. We'll go ahead and star those. And then at some point at the end of the show, kind of after we go through a lot of the things, or we may even hit some of those if they pertain to maybe something that Richard is talking about at that moment. We can go ahead and hit that, but drop those in the chat. We want this to be an open discussion. We want you to be involved in it. And so we're going to have a whole lot of fun. So Richard, you and I kind of first connected, I think at Audio Advice Live last year, which was super cool. And I got a chance to really see madVR firsthand. And you gave me the demonstration. We did a video on my channel. So that was super, super cool. And then not too long ago, you sent me a madVR Envy to play and set up in my own home theater. And I'll even share some of my experience with that throughout the podcast tonight. And but before we jump into that, let me just say hi to some folks in the chat, and then we'll do some intros here. Good to see you, Megatron, Nicholas. We got Medieval, JD the Expert, Crying Brian. Brian, you shouldn't be so sad, man. Man,
I'm always sad.
See that?
Brian,
That's Brian.
face.
Yeah. Who else we got over here? Finster, good to see you, buddy. Chris is in the house. I know he's working tonight, but he's going to be listening on the job, which is always awesome. Mid-Bass Maestro. Let me know in the chat, too, where you're listening in from. I always like to see kind of what part of the world you're listening in. I know we've got folks in the United States, folks all the way across the world. It's always super, super cool to do that. Chris, good to see you. My home theater. Mark, lots and lots of folks in the chat. Again, if you got questions, man, drop those in the chat. We'll try to address those about madVR. And we got folks in from Michigan, Utah, Honolulu. I love it, man. That's on my bucket list, Marv. Jessica and I are definitely going to make it out to Honolulu. I want to do some snowboarding in Utah. So Jim, hook us up with a place to stay, buddy. That'd be awesome. Just kidding, man. Canada. I love my Canada folks, man. Good to see you. Got some guys from Atlanta. Man, you guys are all over the place. Miami, representing Florida. Appreciate you being here. Well, fantastic, guys. So, Richard, just kind of give us, tell us who you are and a little bit of kind of a brief intro of madVR, and we're literally going to dive right in.
Yeah, well, thank you for that update, Michael. That was a great opening, and I saw we had Howard from Singapore in there, so that might be our furthest away. But
awesome.
We have some great customers out in Singapore. So shout out to all you guys watching overseas. It must be pretty early, I guess, for you. But thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. Ryan and I are fresh out of Dallas and the TOLA show over there, the region of the country. That was a lot of fun. As Michael said, I'm Richard Litofsky. I'm the co-founder and CEO of madVR Labs. We started the business, my partner Matthias and I guess it was about maybe a little over 5 years ago, 5.5 perhaps. And we launched our first product in January of 2020. So hard to believe we're 3.5 years in, and we just recently released our Envy Mark II.
Nice.
We're really excited about. We'll talk about some of that tonight. And yeah, we're here to discuss all things madVR, whatever questions you guys have, and you know, I can tell you a little bit about it if that's where you'd like to get started.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the Envy is a video processor that goes in the chain between your AVR and your display or your projector. So your AVR continues to do all of your switching, and then instead of going straight to, say, your projector, you go into the Envy in one input and out from the Envy, one output, over to your projector or wall or micro LED or whatever it is you happen to be using. And then we do all sorts of fun stuff like HDR dynamic tone mapping using our own proprietary algorithms. We do true aspect ratio detection on the fly instantly. We do subtitle management, geometry control. We have some great cool tech with our MotionAI that we're going to dig into tonight that really got people excited out in Texas. That was quite a show. What do you think, Ryan, about the reactions that we had out there?
It was cool to have a lot more exposure to self-emitting displays like the Samsung The Wall. So that was probably the part I enjoyed the most, was getting to really play around with those.
Yeah, so we had the Envy paired in the Samsung Experience Center on 146-inch micro LED, the wall product. And that was a lot of fun. We ran our MotionAI on there and our tone mapping. We actually did some fun stuff with nonlinear stretch since it's a 16:9 format, to make it a little bit more immersive. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But that was really cool. In fact, it's funny, you forget that it's not a projector, right? So at one point, I was doing a presentation, and out of the corner of my eye, I caught somebody kind of in the back row that was like standing up. I don't know if you were in there at the time, Ryan, when this was going on. He was like standing up and like trying to put his head in the projector beam. And then he kind of like raised his hand and like trying to see where the beam was. And the funny part is I actually forgot as well in that moment. I was thinking, why isn't he casting the shadow?
What would have been really funny is if you pretended like he didn't exist, so then he'd question all kinds of reality. Like, I don't cast a shadow anymore. Nobody sees me.
Now, how big was that display?
140. It was 146-inch, 16:9.
Nice.
So it was an impressive display, and it was great to see the Envy paired with it. We've been seeing a lot more interest and use in wall products, probably in the last 9 to 12 months. So really a great tie in there.
Super, super cool. I know we got a lot of show and tell for you guys tonight. Richard has provided with a lot of visual elements, so help you kind of see, what is this madVR thing? What does it do? And I know that you mentioned that it sits in between, let's say, for instance, a projector and, like in my case, in my AVR. So you'd come out of the AVR HDMI, go into the Envy, out of the Envy into your projector. Can this be used and can it be hooked up to any display, or are there limitations there?
Yeah, Brian, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So Envy is just an addition to a signal chain. It doesn't care what display it's connected to, and it doesn't care what sources are feeding it. It's just a processor. So it really is at home in any display environment. Its job is just to process the image and make it better for the end user, as well as make things easier to manage. So don't complexify things or complicate things. Complexify isn't a word. My brain just took a massive, just stopped for a moment. But don't try and overcomplicate things. Just look at Envy as an addition, and don't worry about the necessities of trying to figure out if it's compatible with something else, because it's really agnostic to whatever else you're going to connect to it, in or out.
And I'm sure we're going to talk about like some of the features, but what I'm finding with my setup is you can plug it in and it's good to go for the most part. But then there's a lot of stuff you can go in and tweak to your liking. And so I'm excited to be able for you to share with the audience, like, what are some of those flexibilities, and we'll get on to that when we get into the presentation. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, we kind of like to think of it as like a spice rack or a spice drawer in your kitchen, right? You know, when you plug it in, it's, pure vanilla plain Jane, and right out of the box, it's ready to go. You basically, to get the best HDR tone map image, you just put in how bright your projector is, which you can get using a little $20 meter, and that's really the only setting you need to get up and running. But of course, like we mentioned, there's all sorts of different spices that you can add, and you can go anywhere from just a little dash of something to lots of dashes of lots of things, right?
Right.
So do you want to start off talking about HDR tone mapping? And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that we've been well known for over the past few years in particular. So what you're looking at here, these are actual photographs that one of our dealers took off of their projector, with the projector doing the tone mapping, and that would be where it says HDR without Envy, and then HDR with the Envy. Which it's really nice about this too is that we've got a little button on the remote control, and you can push that and instantly kind of toggle back and forth, right? And be able to see like what is the Envy doing different, than my display. So this kind of gives you an idea, if you're kind of new to HDR and you think, well, what would be the difference between tone mapped images? What you see there on the left is a tone mapped image, just using different algorithms. The Envy has a number of patent pending technologies, highlight recovery, contrast recovery, things like that are working to really bring out, like, look at the faces in the top right compared to the top left, and the color saturation that remains in the bottom right versus the bottom left. So you will find a lot of them. And Michael, we did this at Audiovice, if you remember, this exact scene. And you can see how things can get blown out and colors get desaturated.
Yeah, the ghost pictures in the back, that was kind of one of the most dramatic parts of it, because on the left you can see they're pretty muted. It's hard to make out that those are actual faces back there. But then on the right, the Envy is able to pull out a lot of those details, and really just define those images so you can see what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's always an interesting conversation piece. A lot of times, we show this at at our demos when we're at shows, and we invite people. Okay, when you get back home, try this scene on your projector or your display, and see how it compares. And we get a lot of great positive feedback on that.
So one thing before we move too much further, I know there's got to be some guys in the chat, because I was there not too long ago, and I don't know the nitty gritty of it, but give us just a really brief explanation. What is dynamic tone mapping for those that may not be familiar with that?
Yeah, sure. Well, in a nutshell, dynamic tone mapping is the process of taking studio reference HDR that's mastered. There's a certain expected brightness range that these titles are mastered at. So, for example, one common brightness range is 4,000 nits. And don't let the term nits be intimidating, even though it's a tiny little word. It's just basically, you think of it as a unit of brightness. And so 4,000 nits would be essentially 4,000 steps between just the tiniest bit of light and the maximum amount of light. And these movies are mastered and on a studio reference monitor, and usually a small one, maybe like a 32-inch, HDR monitor. And then the challenge, though, is that we don't have 4,000 nits when we watch these movies at home. Today, you typically, for example, most projectors will put out somewhere on the upper end of 120, 150, maybe 200.
I wish.
On
my end,
what are you getting?
It's not that much, I don't think.
Yeah. And on the lower end, it can be as low as like 40, 50. Things that impact the nits are, number one, the lumen output from the projector itself. The size of the screen plays a big role as well, and the aspect ratio of the screen. The wider the aspect ratio, the more light you wind up using, because you wind up zoomed out further to fill that screen. And also the gain of the screen, how reflective that is. And especially if you're doing things with acoustically transparent screens, then it gets really challenging, because those are usually negative gain screens. So while Ryan, what do you have? I'm 1.1. 1.1. Yep. Jonathan, I assume you have
mine's 0.9. Yeah, 0.9 Seymour XD, so it's 0.9.
Okay, yeah. All right, I'm running the same screen. And so when you get into these acoustically transparent screens, you usually actually lose brightness. So back kind of to the idea, how do you get something that was mastered for 4,000 nits to look good on a display or projector that might only be putting out 100 to 150 nits. And so dynamic tone mapping is the ability to have an algorithm that smartly knows how to map essentially the gamma of the image so that it can fit the available brightness and still have peak brights and spectral highlights really shine and look bright while the darks still look dark.
Gotcha. Super cool. There is a question that pertains to this. If I could bring this one up, Eric says, what HDR is that? Is that HDR10, HDR10 plus, HLG, DV?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I assume he's referring to what we're looking at on the screen.
I think
here.
so. That's why I figured I'd go ahead and bring it up now instead of later.
So this is the Envy's tone mapping, right? So we use the HDR10 base layer, and we have our own dynamic tone mapping. It's one of the things that gives the Envy a big advantage when it comes to rendering dynamic tone mapping. There is no actual industry standard for how tone mapping gets applied. And so essentially what the Envy does is it looks at every single pixel in every single frame every second, and it determines what is the metadata, and it determines how to tone map that on the fly. And one of the advantages that comes out of there is being able to do interesting contrast adjustments, right? So for example, say a bedroom scene, candlelight on the night table. It's fairly lit up, just it's still dark, but you can kind of see person sits up in bed and their shoulder now blocks that candle, right? It gets much darker. So the Envy dynamically can adjust that contrast on the fly, right? So these are the types of things that the short answer is that it is our own tone mapping.
Very cool. Appreciate you answering that.
Any other questions at all about HDR tone mapping before we kind of move on?
That. I'm trying to keep an eye on them. Some of them we'll just star and we'll cover those after the end.
So I have something to comment on, and maybe it'll be part of the conversation later, but you can see in this set of pictures that it brought down the brightness, but the dynamic tone mapping doesn't only do that. It's bringing down the highlights where it's kind of like losing detail, but it will bring up details that are too dim. So if you had a scene like we watched the 1917 movie in the MWAVE event last year, and there was a staircase scene that's so dark you couldn't even hardly tell what was going on, the madVR Envy was able to bring out those details so you could see it very clearly. It still looked like night. It didn't make it look like day, but you could actually see what was depicted in the scene. Yeah. So it's just resolving the detail in the scene, whether it be bright or dark, dynamically, as Richard is kind of alluding to. And it's really a pretty impressive product.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I know what scene you're talking about there. It is pretty wild, right? If you watch it without our dynamic tone mapping, you can barely even see anything happening. If we're talking about the same scene, and then he's kind of going up the ladder.
Yes.
Right. And
going up the stairway, I think, at the night. Yeah, he gets knocked down, he gets shot at, and he falls down the stairs and wakes up, and it's just black if you don't have a good tone mapping solution.
Yeah, it is really a neat function. And like you said, it is about dynamically controlling the brightness so that you don't blow out highlights like what you see here in the bottom left, and you don't blow out your color saturation. Like if you look closely on the image in the bottom right, to the left edge of that, you can see kind of like this green line that is above the green line, right? So you kind of see like this yellow green line, but and a kind of a cloud of green. But if we were to zoom in on that, you would see there actually kind of outlined darker greens around there. So there's a lot of really impressive detail that it's able to restore that otherwise can get blown out. Ryan, I see you nodding your head. Do you have any,
I'm just
any
dancing.
thoughts to add?
Ryan does his own thing every week, man. We just smile and laugh.
No,
So
I
do you
don't
wanna
think
move
really
on?
anything else. I think that's a pretty good summation of what HDR brings to the table. I think that leads into there's other things that Envy can do, like aspect ratio management, right? So everybody knows madVR, or typically knows madVR for HDR and tone mapping. I think that's because the home theater piece and the premise that Envy was built on was kind of that. But there's a lot more that Envy brings to the table along with that. So I guess let's transition maybe into
Wanna go
that,
to the
and maybe we
PDF?
can explain
Yeah.
what else Envy can do.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Let's talk about. I guess we just kind of go in order here. The instant aspect ratio detection. So
So you tell me
if
what
you-
page here.
one more down.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, page 3.
All right, right there you go.
Yeah. And so what Ryan is talking about here is our truly instant aspect ratio detection, right? And so anyone that has a scope screen, and I know, Michael, you just kind of went through this,
Oh yeah.
you know, they know the trials and tribulations of dealing with lens memory and zooming in and out, right? And it's a pain in the butt for integrators. It's a pain in the butt for end users. And it's just kind of generally accepted as how things are, right? So when you use the Envy, you wind up zooming out to fill the screen. So what we're looking at the top, we're looking at a scope screen here. By scope, we mean it's wider than 16 by 9. Okay, so in this case, let's say this is 235 or 240 screen. And what happens is it's great when you're watching that scoped content that's like in the top image. But when you're watching a 16 by 9 image, you wind up with these black bars on the side.
Right.
And so what has to happen is if you have your projector zoomed to properly fill the image, to properly fill the screen, like on the top, then when you display a 16 by 9 image, it actually winds up on the top of the masking and on the ceiling and down on the wall, right? And so anyone that has a scope screen is very familiar with this, right? And so you either have to try to use automation or a button on your remote so that each time you're looking at 16 by 9, you adjust and zoom down, and each time you go to scope, you have to zoom up.
Yeah, and another part of that, just from a personal experience, the projector has to zoom, let's say for instance, zoom out, then it has to reposition, and then it has to refocus as well. So it's normally about 15 seconds for that process to take place.
Right. And on top of it, sometimes you're going back and forth, right? You're in the Apple TV menu at 16 by 9. You pick a movie and you start playing it, and then you change your mind. And that's a scope movie, right? So when you go out of the Apple TV menu, you start playing scope, you got to hit the button, and then it goes all wide for 15 seconds, and then it's locked in. And then, a few minutes later, you're like, oh, I saw this one before, or whatever it is. And then you go back to the Apple TV menu. Now it's on the ceiling and on the floor, right? You can't really see what's on the bottom row or the top row. So you push the button, it goes back to 16 by 9, and then the cycle keeps repeating. So the way that we handle this with the Envy is that we deliver what's known as constant image height, CIH. And that means that the image always fills the screen top to bottom. And what it does is it will bring back the black bars as necessary when you go to 16 by 9. So you zoom out once, you set the projector there, and you never touch it again. And then what happens is when you're watching 16 by 9, it will automatically fit instead of it being above the screen and below the screen.
Right. So is it detecting this through the metadata in the movie?
No, it's actually looking at the image.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's looking at it. It knows the aspect ratio is changing long before several milliseconds ahead of time, right? And that's why when you watch it, it is truly instant, not a single drop frame or difference, right? So you just going in and out of whatever aspect ratio is. So it's fantastic when the aspect ratio is changing within a movie, like Interstellar. But it's also great when the aspect ratio is changing because you're changing different content between, the native user interface, like Apple TV at 16:9 and content.
This fellow right here's ready. He's had enough.
So give you a little backstory about Brian. Brian, he's building a home theater, and he's one of my patrons, and super great guy. But every week he's texting me, he's going, "I'm ready to upgrade. I'm ready," and he hadn't even built out his theater yet. So he cracked me up, and he's honest there. He's like, "I'm ready." He was texting me, I think yesterday, either today or yesterday. He's like, "Man, I'm thinking about that Envy." He said, "I can't wait to see this podcast tonight." So, Brian,
that's great.
awesome.
Something else
That's
to
great.
expand on this is that Envy, as we talked about with being agnostic to sources and displays, doesn't care what the aspect ratio is because it's looking at it based on the data that's actually in the black bar itself, and it can detect light and color values that are representative of data instead of absolute blacks. And that's how it determines, and using other AI to be able to figure out what is there, because there's some things that you can run into that have to be accounted for. But effectively what can happen is any aspect ratio can be compensated for in this fashion. And we actually are not constrained to what you would normally think as a standard aspect ratio for screen sizes. So you could theoretically cover an entire wall with your screen, and then Envy could fill that screen with your content. So it doesn't matter either what the content's aspect ratio is or what the screen's aspect ratio is. Envy is able to dynamically adjust and fill if you want to utilize its custom zoom configurations or nonlinear stretch to be able to make that happen.
Yeah. All I heard you say was enhance.
Enhance. See that license plate number?
Yeah, you got it.
Well, that's actually a great segue into nonlinear stretch. Unless there's any questions that you want to address.
Man, it's almost like I've read this document before.
Like I say, guys, if you have questions, especially about, because we're just going through each one of the features of the Envy. So if there's something that you want to get answered while we're talking about that, go ahead and drop it in the chat, and we'll try to cover it as we go through this. Mark says, he's ready. He says it'll save him some money on screen masking, which is true.
And no coffee, just caffeine from soda.
And it's actually cool. Mark brings up a good point about screen masking, right? So it is screen masking is great if you're going to keep using, of course, the actual aspect ratio. In my case, I mean, my whole family and I are big lovers of nonlinear stretch. So even if we had, I have a 237 screen. So even if I had masking, I wouldn't be using it. It would just be open basically all the time anyway. But it can still be great because there may be times that you don't want to use nonlinear stretch, right? So it's fantastic for sports. I love it for movies. I think it's fun sometimes to not even know what the actual aspect ratio is until the end of the movie. But we'll come back to that in a second. Why don't I talk a little bit about what nonlinear stretch is? And essentially the idea behind nonlinear stretch plus our system is that we're able to fit any aspect ratio of content to any aspect ratio screen. And so, for example, what we have here is we have a football game that is in 16:9 that we're showing it as 237. And that's really helps with the level of immersion, right? I mean, when you think about, it's a lot of screen real estate that's brought up. And the trick, of course, is doing it in a way where things do not become distorted, especially by the ends, right? So, for example, if you look in the center, on the left edge, the center, you'll see there's a player all the way in the back in the blue.
Right.
Okay, so he's near the very edge of the screen. Okay, but yet look when you see how the nonlinear stretch works, he still looks the same. I mean, he's bigger, as is everyone, because the image is bigger, but he's not super wide, right?
Right.
Like you would have expected years ago, right? A lot of people, they remember nonlinear stretch from, another era. And our nonlinear stretch is special. We actually have patent pending on it because this is the first time that anyone's actually ever done vertical compression along with horizontal expansion. So what do I mean by that, right? So if you picture a sponge, right? If you're holding a sponge horizontally and you squeeze the middle of it, naturally what happens, right? The ends just kind of naturally go out, right? And so what we do is we compress vertically, which gives us natural horizontal expansion without any distortion. And then we finish it off with a little actual horizontal expansion. That's why we say vertical compression simultaneous with horizontal expansion. And that produces the look that you see here. And, you can use profiles in Envy like, okay, I only want to use it when I watch sports, or I want to use it for certain movies, or even using it halfway, right? What do I mean by that? Let's say it's 16:9 and you have a 240 screen. You can make it more like 2.2, which is like halfway in between, to remove half the black bars, right? And then really have it look super, super sharp and pick up that immersion.
So they're inside the software side of it. You have a lot of control over how you want that image to fill your screen, correct?
Yeah, that's right. You have the ability to pick how much vertical compression and how much horizontal compression, and also what strength. So not just the strength, but the area. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist to use the Envy. We purposely have very intuitive, easy to use menus that are inviting, because as you move the controls, it actually shows you like frames. Did you see this on your thing? Right.
I did.
So you could say like, okay, this is the area that I want you to work within, or I want you to work within this area. And then you can actually make it bigger, 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 stop, and then vertically bigger, 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 stop, and just dial it in however you want. Save that as your preference, and you're done.
So as one thing, Ryan was helping me set it up, and so he's got it set up into thirds basically. So the right third and the left third, that's a big area to disperse that stretch, versus if we were to just grab the very edge of it and try to stretch that's going to look really funky. That the guy on the receiver on the far left would be like 2 to 3 times as wide as he is now if you were to do that. So, but it's nice to have that flexibility to where you as the consumer, you choose. And actually this goes back to, I think Mark asked it over here. Where is it? Yeah. He says, does it trim like a little bit of the top and the bottom? You have control over that. How much crop do you want to apply? Do you want to do more stretch? I know in our conversation, Richard, your advice is to try to do a little bit of everything. So that way you're not cropping a ton, you're not stretching a ton, but you're kind of distributing that load across all of those variables so that you have as minimal distortion and, aberrations. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Artifacting,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yeah, it doesn't
it's a
look
great point.
odd and weird to you.
Right. And I think you made this point earlier too, right? Where the Envy gives you several different controls and ways that you can dial it in how you like, right?
Cool.
So we're here to make suggestions. You're there to make decisions. And ultimately, the dealer and the end user dial the unit in however the end user, prefers. So there's sometimes we like you said, we tend to set it up with a mix of everything. A little bit of crop, a little bit of stretch.
Sure.
And then sometimes people will say, oh, but I see you're cutting off like the edge of the stairs on the end.
Correct.
And then we say, yeah, okay. And they say, well, do you need to do that? We say, no, here's a remote. And then here, just change it yourself. And it's the first time they're even touching the remote. And they go down, and say, okay, now move that number from 8 to 0. Okay. And now move that one from 8 to 0. And then, oh, okay, there it is. And they said, oh, I don't really even notice any difference. So it's just a matter of personal preference, but the flexibility is there to set it however you like.
Sure. Mikey has a question related to this image here. He says, I'm noticing cropping in the example photos of the game if the score was on the very bottom of the top frame, would it be cut off after processing? So we can see it's kind of up a little bit on the bottom, but if that scoreboard was moved further down, it probably would have some cropping there, because you don't have the ability to move, a ticker counter at the bottom. So again, I
Right.
think
You
they
can,
would, as a consumer, they could control how much of that crop is happening. So if there's maybe a sports channel that they're going to have kind of like templates on every game that they run.
yeah.
So I'm sure you could dial it into where it doesn't crop off that. You would just have to apply less cropping.
Right. And so that's a great example. So I appreciate him bringing that up. Now, if you look here, that area under there is kind of wasted space, right? So, you don't want to cut off the score, of course, and you need to know what down it is and so forth, but you don't need to see the yard mark there when it's above you on the top, right? So you can get more aggressive, right? And you can move that and crop the bottom more without cropping off the top, and you can dial it in. The camera positions during these games are usually fixed, so you're able to dial it in how you want, and you can store that. Let's say this is on ESPN. This is generally how all the football games are going to be on ESPN, and then you might have another game that's on ABC, right? And so you could have easily set up different profiles for different games, different sports, like news tickers. A lot of times, like you have a sports channel, right? And then talk about the upcoming boxing match, just scrolling down on the bottom. And and it takes up, like, on a large screen, as you guys probably know, it takes up like almost a foot, right? That personally, I don't even really want to see that. It's not even so much a matter of, you kind of kill two birds with one stone, because you get that distraction off of the screen while also increasing significantly the immersion of the image, without having to even use any stretch at that point to do it, and then finishing it off with a little stretch.
One thing that I saw a couple of comments, and somebody was asking if I had one. The cool thing is, yes, Richard did send me one, and I'll be making a series of videos. So what he's describing, we're not able to show you here, but I'm gonna have some dedicated videos that'll show you, okay, here's what you would do, and here's the flexibility that you have in that nonlinear stretch, so that you can control how much of that cropping, how much of the zoom, how much of the stretch, what section of that image do you want to apply that nonlinear stretch. So I'm super excited about that. So look for those to come.
Yeah, and I see a couple of interesting questions on the topic.
Yeah, go ahead. Feel free to address any of those.
Let's cover a couple of those. So Mikey asked, how could I crop more of the top? So there's actually two very simple controls among, I think it's about 8 controls on the configuration page. The first one is what we call left and top crop together. And then under there's a bottom and right crop together. So Mikey, you would simply just increase that number at the top. So this was probably done with something like around 12. So you could do, let's say 14. The nice thing is it's all in real time.
Yeah,
So
you're seeing it visually happen.
Yeah, right. As you move it, you could be like a little bit more, a little bit more. Okay, perfect. Stop. Right. And be there. Jed asked, how does NLS handle subtitles and device menus? So that's a fantastic question. And it's almost like Jed magically appeared at the right time, because that's actually a perfect segue into our next topic here, which is subtitle management. And so, as Jed brought up, this is a big challenge for people with scope screens. I see, Michael, you're nodding your head. If you use subtitles, and, some of us are getting a little bit older, it seems like every day somehow or another that's happening. And you don't hear as well as you used to. So, like, personally, I generally use subtitles some of the time, not all the time. I actually help. I find, I don't know about you guys, but I kind of find like it helps me comprehend the movie better when I'm reading the dialogue than listening to it. Did you guys ever get that feeling?
especially if you're watching, what was that movie that was just horrendous? Where everything's backwards. Tenet. Oh my gosh, that was a
Oh.
nightmare to watch in the theater. I'm going, I kept leaning forward and I still couldn't understand what they were saying half the time. But later on, we found out that was kind of intentional. But
yeah, so I mean, whether you're using it for comprehension or for hearing, or whether it's
turn the
foreign
volume
language,
down. Yeah.
or even, of course, foreign language. Not that you're watching it in a foreign language to you, but foreign language spoken in the movie, and all of a sudden subtitles pop up in the middle of the movie,
Right.
out of nowhere. And of course, we have customers around the world in over 30 countries, and a lot of our customers overseas are watching movies in languages that may not be their native language. And so it's very, very popular overseas as well. But let's kind of talk about what happens without an Envy and what happens with an Envy. Should we do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So if you look here, the first box that you see here, this is an example of what happens when you're watching a scope movie that has subtitles. You're essentially forced to watch like you see here, which is, we call this a window box. Okay, we call it a window box because it's like a window that's framed, and you can imagine that the immersion here is much less than what you see below it, right? I mean, it's hard to believe in a way that that's actually the same image. I mean, that's how significant of a hit you take to the level of immersion to have subtitles on. And the reason that you have to do this is because normally this is the top image, is how a scope movie looks on a scope screen until you use lens memory or zoom,
right,
to zoom it out to fill the screen. But as you zoom it, so picture each corner, top right corner going into the top right corner of the black, and same thing for the other corners going into their respective corners. So what then winds up happening is the subtitles get pushed onto the wall, okay? Because everything gets larger, but the subtitle is not in the image area, right? So it winds up on the wall, which is, of course, very distracting. So if you want to move to the next page, we'll show you how we handle that. And the way it works is the Envy will display the image at full screen, like you see on the top. And then when subtitles appear, we just magically bring up the bottom black bar just enough to fit the subtitle and put it in there. So the nice thing is you get to enjoy the movie instead of watching, like a postage stamp for the whole movie. You get to watch the whole movie full size. And then whenever there's subtitles, it pops up to the bottom. And then when the subtitles are done, there's something called a stickiness setting that controls how long the black bar stays along, right? Because Envy instantly adjusts, right? So you wouldn't want normally subtitles to have no stickiness because, in a dialogue, in a scene, you and I are talking, we're in a scene together, and, there may be a few seconds or longer in between when I stop talking and when you start talking. And so the subtitles disappear. So you don't want the image to keep jumping in size back and forth. So we provide a number of different stickiness levels. Personally, I like it on 5 seconds because I want to go back to the largest image right away as soon as possible. And what we find is that in most scenes, dialogue that's going to continue, someone is talking again within 5 seconds. But there's other choices like 15 seconds, 3 minutes. There's a setting that says until the end of the movie, right? Because we have some customers that say, hey, it's fine if the subtitles appear and I didn't know it. I want you to move, make the room for it, but I don't want move again. And just hold that. And it's okay. I'll watch with the bottom black bar the whole time if I need to. But this way it's not shifting on me.
And again, that goes back to the fact that you as the consumer have the control over how you want that handled on your display.
Yeah, exactly. I should also mention that it's very dynamic, meaning If you need 1 line of subtitles, we fit that. If you need 2 or 3 lines, we make the black bar area bigger and fit that. Likewise, the top is handled differently too. So for example, the top is often used for more closed captioning. So for example, in brackets, doorbell rings, right? That appears at the top. We'll move the top, we'll bring a top bar down and put doorbell rings in there. Usually we can have 0 stickiness in there because that's off. Usually what's happening at the top is like a message and then gone. It's not coming and going, going like subtitles. And so you might have a case where you've got 2 lines of subtitles on the bottom, doorbell ring appears, it comes on the top, it's gone. You've got the dialogue continues on the bottom. So the top and bottom are completely independent. Now, I think it was also Jed that asked about on-screen display elements, OSD. So for example, chapter, thumbnails, fast forward, timeline. Hey, how much time is left in this movie, right? So, you're watching a movie, let's say again, you're on Apple TV, you're trying to figure out, hey, is this a good time for a bathroom break or what else we got going here? You hit pause. If you don't have an Envy and you're zoomed out at scope like you would normally be, the timeline is now on your masking or on your wall and can even be hard to read. So what the Envy does is it sees that this timeline has come up. It shifts the image up just like it was a subtitle. You're able to see that. When you clear it, it goes away and you keep right on running. Were there any questions at all about?
I don't see any questions on subtitles.
I think you hit them all.
Yeah.
Awesome. I guess one other thing to talk about would be calibration.
Okay.
Calibration is a very important topic. It often gets overlooked. Displays today are pretty well calibrated, especially laser-based and LED-based projectors. But there's a lot of things. The room plays a factor. The screen plays a factor. And so whether you do calibration yourself or you going to bring in a professional like an ISF calibrator, the Envy has all sorts of controls to work with software like CalMan and Color Space to be able to do what's called 1D and 3D LUTs. And that's actually kind of a lot of fun to really take that level of detail, because without getting too technical, there's something called a grayscale and a gamma, which is basically the balance of light. There's a formula, it's called a gamma curve, that controls how bright. So it's not just what color is each step of brightness, but how bright is that step of brightness, because it's not linear, right? So for example, 50% brightness is not, or the 50% step in brightness is not actually just half of the brightness at 100%. So a calibration will balance that gamma and the color along that grayscale. And also, you then have what's called the 3D LUT, which will address all the color space within the gamut. So with the Envy, we have 4,096 points available to be able to dial in that grayscale and gamma perfectly, along with up to 16.7 million interpolated points for color calibration as well. So it allows your calibrator or yourself, if you have the meters and the tools, to really get just the most accurate calibration.
We've got a couple of questions that came in, and maybe even some comments that probably tie in with that. If that's cool, I'll go through some of those. So Chris earlier mentioned he's been looking at madVR, looks really amazing. Midbase says, why is madVR so angry?
Mad is in mad, crazy good.
So is that where madVR came from? The name?
There's actually a couple different interpretations. My partner, co-founder and inventor of madVR, his online handle is Madchi, One interpretation is it came from the MAD and MAD-Sheet and VR for video rendering.
Gotcha.
It also kind of works as well as MAD as in crazy good.
I love it. I love it. Grave Danger asks a question. He says, are there going to be madVR Envy demonstrations at MWAVE? Glad you brought that up. We will have madVR at MWAVE. They're one of our exhibitors, so we're super grateful for them being at year 2 of MWAVE. If you're not familiar with MWAVE, you can get all the details on the website, midwestaviexperience.com. The dates for it are July 14th through the 16th, and we will be in Kansas City at the Kansas City Convention Center. So we'd love for you to come out and hang out with us. And so, yeah, we're going to have madVR there. You're going to get to see it in person, live, demonstrated, and probably on some big screens too. So
yeah,
that's cool.
We're super excited about it. And, what's really nice about the MWAVE event is things get done differently. Things get done in a way that allows the enthusiasts to really dig in, right? And so, a lot of times at the bigger shows, like at CEDIA or ISE or even like these, like the tech summits that we do, it's very much kind of quote unquote all business, right? Just come in, see the highlights, and there's usually a long line of people that could be waiting literally hours.
Yeah, for sure.
And so there's not a whole lot of time to do deep dives. So what's really nice and we're really excited about MWAVE is that, it really kind of caters to the enthusiast that wants to really kind of understand and dig in and have that time and attention to really say, hey, what's going on here? Let me see this. Can I see it that way? Can I see it that way? So hats off to you guys for doing something really unique and different.
Appreciate that. We're going to have a whole lot of fun this year. It's definitely way bigger than last year, and so many vendors that have signed on, and we've got an awesome venue that Ryan found, Kansas City Convention Center, which is way more conducive.
Notice how he puts me attached to it, so if it sucks, he can distance himself.
No,
from
dude, I live in Florida. I mean, how am I going to find it?
I don't know. We went and looked at stuff while you were here when we said, all right, we're not going to talk about MWAVE for 2 weeks, and then we're out looking at hotels the next day.
Dude, I was so pumped, man. I wanted a break, and we're driving back to your house. And I'm like, let's give us a pause, a couple weeks, and then I'm like, nah, man, let's just go for it. And so we've been planning since last year, and we've taken your feedback, those that were in attendance last year, and we're making it bigger and better. And we just, like Richard said, I mean, we want this to be for you, the consumer. We want you to get some experience that you simply can't get at any other AV event. So we're really, really pumped about it. And so let's see what else we've got over here.
Are we talking about MotionAI at all or no?
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm trying to skip over some of those questions. Does it adjust for IMAX enhanced?
Yes, it's the aspect ratio control that we talked about.
Okay. Would an Envy be useful for like a Christie projector? I mean, we're talking 80,000. Some of the Christie projectors are pushing $400,000. Would it be great for something like, that's super, super high end? Yeah.
Some of our favorite jobs are the super high end ones, and some of them are not the super high end ones. Yeah. But it's interesting. That question comes up sometimes, like, hey, I've got this projector that's $250,000 or $500,000, and surely that must have video processing that covers the whole gamut.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is, what we do is we allow these displays to do what they do best, which is to show the pixels, while we do what we do best, which is to prepare the pixels to be shown.
Nice.
So if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And the cool thing, we were at CEDIA, and Nigel from Absolute Ultimate AV, he's got a $450,000 Christie Eclipse projector. And you're thinking, man, this is a beautiful image. You look back there in the rack, and guess what it has? madVR Envy. So
there was a piece of electrical tape over the power light, but it was there.
He did not like any light in the room, man. That was hilarious.
He asked Youthman to put tape over his teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Michael, you bring up a good point. That's a great example, right? And you have that super high end projector at CDL and paired with an Envy, for good reasons. So yeah.
Well, remember, guys, too, that just because a projector can run at 25,000 lumens does not mean that you're going to run it at 25,000 lumens or that you're going to get 25,000 lumens after it's reflected off the screen back to you. There's a lot of variables that go into that. If you put that on a small screen, you may burn right through the screen. I don't think that would happen. But your grays, your blacks would be gray, and you would just have all kinds of different issues. So the idea with a lot of these projectors is you run maybe laser at 100%, and then you ratchet down that aperture or the iris in order to let a little of that light through, and that's going to greatly increase your contrast. And then you use Envy to be able to do the tone mapping. Like, I think the measured brightness on his screen was like 190 nits or something like that, about 200 nits at CDA was about that. So, I mean, my NZ9 does that. So it's all about containing and utilizing what you have to give you the best potential image. And if you don't have the headroom, you can't necessarily tone everything down. So it's really important to have that headroom. You don't necessarily have to do it unbridled, though, which is what a lot of people think you should do, but you don't.
So Nicholas, I think it's kind of more of a statement. Obviously, the better the TV, or in some people's cases, the better the projector, the better that the Envy can perform. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to look at it, and I think you guys saw this, and Ryan, correct me or help me remember, but at MWAVE last year, you guys did some really cool experiments, right, where you took a lower, more base level, entry level projector and put an Envy on it and put it up against projectors that were several times more expensive. And most people preferred the Envy with the lower end projector. Although, of course, remember, everything is relative, because if you put an Envy with the higher end model projector, then you're talking a whole nother game.
Right. So the better the specs that you can get out of a projector, typically the better experience you're going to get. An ideal showcase of this is what we showed in January at our projector shootout when we put this on an RS420, right? It's onboard software capability, horrific, not good. HDR, very bad. And it's just not a great experience. But its hardware capability, phenomenal if it's on a small enough screen. So we put it on a test against an NZ8, and I'm thinking in the corner, man, the NZ8 is going to crush it. But they both had madVRs on them, gonna crush it. And then we go to voting, and the 421. And I was very confused. It was so confusing that we reran the test 3 times.
Yeah, you thought you messed up. You're like, we had to have done something wrong.
And then the second time, the NZ8 won, and then the third time, the 421. So the better the hardware capability of the display is, the better the end result can be. Now, if you put this on something like Mikey asking what would happen if you put this on a Sony 5000 or an LS 12000, you're still going to get an excellent result, mainly because of the software capabilities, right? So what we saw at MWAVE when this happened, I got a random comment when we were doing the live stream, and I didn't plan any of the live stream because I wanted it to be as authentic as possible. Somebody said, hey, let's put the LS 12000 with the Envy up against the NZ9. And I couldn't do the NZ9 because the LS 12000 and it were in the same rack, but I could do it against the NZ8. And we did that. And before we did that test, we had seen the JVCs against the LS 12000. And the LS 12000 got schmammered. Now, Jonathan, since then, has found some settings in the LS 12000 when you turn some stuff down and sacrifice some of its brightness to be able to compete again. But when you're trying to maintain all of that brightness, it was not really a fair fight in my eyes. But when you put the Envy on it, it turned around, and it was an unfair fight in the other way. So it was unanimously voted that the LS 12000 at that point had a better image than the NZ8. Now, you couldn't fix the contrast, right? So your black levels were stuck because you can't fix the hardware capabilities of the projector, but the tone mapping made that big of a difference for that comparison. So if you give it on a lower end display, you're going to have great results. I mean, you'll find out how important tone mapping actually is when it's done correctly.
Sure.
Yeah, and just to add to Mikey's comment, if I may, because it's a great one. Like when you talk about these projectors, you have the tone mapping, and there's, I think you will find when you do comparisons with the Envy against any other tone mapping that exists, I think that you will find where our advantages really shine. But on top of it, you have these other functions we're talking about. Okay, so for example, constant image height, instant auto aspect ratio control. The Sony 5000, great projector, no zoom, no automated lens zoom. Okay, so you cannot use that projector with a scope screen, because unless you feel like getting up every time and standing on a chair or a ladder, like you thought it was bad, Michael, to push a button on your remote and have it come out. Just imagine having to manually change the zoom. So for example, you could then use a Sony 5000 along with an Envy, and then have this automated lens and still make it work for a scope screen, right? So it really, and we'll kind of talk about that in a minute too, about motion handling. The Envy provides you with the best of both worlds with everything. So for example, oftentimes it's, well, I like brand X over brand Y because brand X is known for having better motion handling, but brand Y is known for having better, contrast or blacks or whatever it might be. And so, all these types of things that, like with an Envy, you've got the best of both worlds in all the categories, and then can pick whatever projector you prefer for the projector's performance and not have to worry about what features are or are not supported.
Rob had a question back here talking about, we were talking about cropping. Do you crop that's set up once, or can you do it for each program?
Ryan, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So madVR, once you do its initial setup, you don't have to do anything after that. Once you set the aspect ratios and you set the peak luminance, once you set the screen boundary, which is effectively telling Envy where the physical constraints of your screen are, it's done. You don't have to specify that ever again. Envy detects all of this on the fly. So it actually looks at the data for every pixel and then makes determinations dynamically based on what it sees. So we look at metadata as a reference point from HDR10 to see what the peak brightness is supposed to be for that particular frame. But after that, Envy does everything dynamically. And we do that because we don't want to push past the director or cinematographer's intent on that particular frame or that particular piece of content, depending on how the metadata is done. But we do everything on the fly, so you're not having to push buttons or tell Envy, oh, I'm using this aspect ratio or this one. Envy does it all for you. And it does it so well and so quickly that even if it's a multi-aspect ratio film, say Interstellar or The Dark Knight or Maverick or any of those, if you have it set correctly, let's say you're on a CinemaScope screen and you have your NLS configured, you will never know that an aspect ratio change took place.
Yeah.
You're just going to think it's a single aspect ratio piece of content, and you're going to be fooled. Rick and I have been fooled. It's very easy to do. And you may think, oh, I'll notice the distortion, which somebody commented with the
lines,
the line in the football. And sometimes, in full transparency, you can. But that's the beauty, is that you have the granularity to be able to go back and make the changes that you want, dial things in more intently, tone things back. It depends on how you want to do it. But once it's set and it's set to your liking, Envy's quite capable to fool you even when it's making changes and the content is supposed to be another way, but Envy is showcasing it in a different way to give you more of an increase in immersion.
Yeah. And
so
again,
how many?
I'll show you some actual examples in my theater room of that, and we'll have some fun with that.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to ask, how many save slots do you have? So I assume if you wanted to have like different, this made the football lines move too much, so I want to use this setting for football, I want to use this setting for hockey. How many different save positions do you have?
Theoretically, you can have unlimited.
Wow.
The one drawback is that the GUI as of right now is limited to space. It's on our to-do list to expand. But theoretically, you could have an unlimited capacity.
So as of right now, what are we talking 10?
Over 10?
Okay.
And of course, then you could also use like a different profile group, right? So you could have like, nonlinear stretch, group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and put 10 or 12 in each one. Like you won't run out of, you'll run out of ideas before you run out of space.
And then if you have an IP control system, you can have it do some of this stuff automatically, so you don't have to do things. It can detect, depending on how you set this up, you could say, I want this particular profile to be utilized on this particular piece or type of content from this source, and then it does it automatically. There are some ways to be able to do that in Envy based on aspect ratio, resolutions, color spaces, content type, stuff like that. But when you start pairing all of this stuff together and making marriages, your ability to make more complex decisions greatly increases. So there's a lot of ways to make this automated, but you also have the ability to do it manually if you so choose.
Yeah. I saw one question came up twice from 2 different people, so I'm going to address that. Nicholas says, do you need to default your TV settings prior to running Envy, or does it completely override the setting? And then there was another one here from Chris, similar. Would I want to flat out my TV display and other picture settings on the receiver, player, console, and start with madVR for the picture settings, or picture settings first, then madVR? Has it been tried? Either way, what's the recommendation there?
Go ahead, Ryan, your configuration guru.
So the best way to do this is to remove all of the processing from the TV or any type of display. You don't want the TV or the source doing anything. Envy is much more capable of it. It has a lot more headroom. It has a lot more processing power. You want it to do everything. No motion interpolation being done by anything, no upscaling, nothing. Let Envy handle it and send it on. Now, some people are going to bring up the fact of, well, what happens when you have SDR, HDR content? What do you do in that situation? Well, as counterintuitive as it may be, you actually just set your TV to stay in SDR. It should never really have to go into HDR. There are some configurations that you could utilize that for, where if you wanted to have like a different peak brightness or lens setting or aperture setting for HDR, SDR content. But for all intents and purposes, you theoretically and technically can just leave your display in SDR. Envy does all of the tone mapping for you and then communicates that HDR data, if it's HDR content type, to the display in a traditional gamma function, so that your display, when it's in SDR, is able to understand it and show the content correctly. So all said and done, make a long story shorter, it's all about just disabling all types of processing on the display itself and letting Envy do everything.
How about that?
Yeah. That's
kind of similar. That's a good little analogy there. Appreciate that, Nicholas. Well, cool deal. So we've got more questions. We'll hit those a little bit later on. If you've got questions about the Envy, continue to drop those in the chat. Definitely appreciate your questions, because that's how we all learn. I know I'm really new to Envy. And so I love hearing your questions, because I've got some of the same questions myself. So continue to drop those in the chat. And Richard, I'm going to turn it back over to you, because I know you got some more exciting stuff you want to share with us.
Yeah. So we're going to spend some time now kind of digging into MotionAI, which really has a lot of people talking and a lot of heads being turned from those in our private testing group and those that had an opportunity to see it live for the first time over at our show in Dallas. So we'll go ahead and we'll talk about that, and then we'll spend a little time talking about the Mark II and what's different, what makes that special, if that sounds good.
Fantastic. Now, is this your images, the 2 images?
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there.
Okay. You tell me when, I'll pull it up.
Yeah. So motion interpolation, for those of you that may not be familiar with it, it's essentially the process of creating new frames to fill the gaps between existing frames in the video, right? And so that results in a smoother, more fluid motion, getting rid of this judder, which is kind of like a jerky or stuttering motion in video, right? So this results in improvements in image clarity, stability, the detail really gets insane, and just a smooth handling, and it just creates a more immersive experience, right? And so another side benefit is that since MotionAI runs at 60p, it means all of your content stays locked at 60p. So your Apple TV's at 60p, or your Kaleidoscope's at 60p, and your effectively, right? It's not actually, but it's effectively, your projector is at 60p all the time. And that makes for either instant or very quick HDMI changes, right? So projectors and displays have all kind of gotten better, where, maybe 3 or 5 or 7 seconds, where, go back a couple generations, it could take 30, 40 seconds, right, to switch that. So it's a really nice kind of side benefit to have the projector locked at 60p. So effectively, depending on your setup, you may have no frame rate changes, which is really nice. And so motion handling, the best way to kind of describe
Before we
it
move
is,
on to that, because I think you brought up a frame rate change, I think that's really important. Somebody in here was talking about black screens, and black screens are typically attributed and caused by any type of content type, frame rate type, chroma, color space, all of that type of stuff switching. When that happens, there has to be another HDMI negotiation that takes place. The more complicated your signal chain gets, the longer a lot of times those black screens take. And the more variables that change, the longer those black screens take. Now, motion interpolation, since you're hard setting Envy and the display's frame rate at 60p, regardless of what the source does, you stay at 60p. And because of that, you're reducing the number or possible variables that can cause an HDMI negotiation to take place, thereby possibly lessening the time those black screens are viewable.
Yeah, it's a great way. And it kind of goes to what Rob is asking here, right? Now, if the source is changing resolution, that's going to be a little bit different, right? But the bigger thing usually in these HDMI switching delays is when a projector or display has to switch between 24p and 60p. And when you use MotionAI, you always run at 60p. And so let me just back up for a moment, just to kind of talk about MotionAI and the crux of what it is about, right? So, I talked about how it fills the gaps in videos, right? So at 24p, essentially that means that you having 24 frames that make up every second of video, okay? Whereas TV and sports usually, as opposed to movies, so movies are at 24p, but TV and sports are usually at 60p. Okay, so that's 60 frames in a second. So if you think about it, like my hand here, okay, if my hand is over the course of a second going to turn like this, okay, then at 60p, there are essentially 60, you can think of it as evenly spaced positions that are frames that occur. So basically this movement is 1/60th of a frame, right, as we go through. So you think about the granularity there. Now 24p is only 24 frames to cover the same range of motion. So what winds up happening is something like this, right? Now I'm exaggerating that, right? But imagine only having 24 positions, so versus 60. And that's the big deal. So what MotionAI does, and any motion interpolation algorithm job, is to add frames that do not exist. Okay, it is to recreate frames that are in between the real frames to fill that in and to create that benefit of the smooth motion and remove that judder again, which is that, that shaking and instability that we see, especially in camera pans, whether they're up or down. And so that's really, if we go ahead, Michael, if you want to bring up the image, the first one, please, that has the it has a couple different scenes in there with it says MotionAI is the headline on it.
Okay, we got the wrong one. I got you.
Yeah, no worries.
Not that one. That's probably this one here. There you go.
Yeah. So motion interpolation in itself is nothing new. It's been around a long time. Your TV probably has it. You probably have turned it off. A lot of times when you mention motion interpolation to people, they will say something like, "Oh, you mean that thing that we all turn off the second we get our TV?" And I would do the same as well. And the reason they turn that off is because although the idea is great in principle, the execution usually is where the challenges are. Okay, so you wind up with these types of artifacts. Okay, so one type of artifact, it may be hard to see, but you're able to zoom in on the motorcycles.
I don't think we can zoom in StreamYard,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Okay, so you can kind of see, and don't worry about the difference in the yellow versus that's just kind of an artifact of the picture being taken. But if you look at the motorcycle on the right, you know, his head is essentially missing, right? And parts of the bike are actually are gone, right? And it's a similar type of thing. If you look at, we call this tearing. In the next picture, the woman's leg literally looks like it's in two pieces. So that's tearing. Then you have things like halo effects, right? And that would be what you see kind of happening around the man's head next to those blinds. And then moving down below that, the woman, you see the outline. If you look to the left of her nose, you can see her whole profile is basically duplicated as she moves. And then some other examples of tearing on the left. Other artifacts that you'll find with motion handling are things like not being able to keep up. So the motion handling might generally be done pretty well, but when there's too many objects on the screen, an explosion, too much action, it just kind of gives up and goes back into, so everything will be smooth, and then all of a sudden it'll be like shaking for a second or two, and then it kind of regroups and moves forward. So these are artifacts that have been with us as an industry for a long time. And another artifact that is a turnoff to a lot of people, though some people like it, is the strong soap opera effect. You know, things making it look like you're on the set watching them film the movie instead of watching the movie. And so what we did with MotionAI is we set out to create what is now become the world's first AI-based motion interpolation. I'm sure you guys have all heard about ChatGPT and all this wild innovation that's going around in the world of AI. These same types of things are happening when it comes to video processing and algorithms. So we are using that AI to be able to introduce next generation motion interpolation known as MotionAI. And one of the things that really makes our AI unique is that this is the first implementation in any dedicated video processor that can operate on the per pixel level. Okay, so typically motion interpolation is done in blocks of pixels.
Okay.
So think of a screen as having 10,000 different, blocks of pixels, and the block can be moved. So two adjacent blocks can be moved up, down, left, whatever it wants to do, but not as individual pixels. Okay. And that is some of the things that result in these artifacts, like the tearing, the blurring, things looking broken. You have two things moving in the wrong way, working against each other, because some pixels need to do something, but some pixels need to do something else, but they're part of the same unit. They got to move the same way. So with MotionAI, every single pixel, which is over 8 million pixels at 4K 60, every single pixel in every single frame, every single second is individually addressable and optimized for motion. And so that's, it's a tall order to be able to produce artifact-free motion interpolation. As much as we would love to do that, we are aware that there will always be this particular rare scene in this movie where something looks a little off for a split second. But our goal is to be able to produce, the world's most advanced motion AI that has the most minimal artifacts. And we've already shown that the soap opera effect is very minimal, if any, and can actually even be completely removed with the granularity. So right now, this is in private alpha testing. We're on an alpha 5 build. Alpha 6 is in development right now. And we have, 8, Ryan? 8 different strength levels
Yes.
and then 3 different options for reintroducing some blur if that's desired. So about 24 different combinations of ways to use these controls. So normally motion interpolation, you might find like a high and a low setting. That's typically what you see, as opposed to 24 different settings. Again, it's all about you being able to find, do you want the image super, super crisp and clear and ultra realistic, or do you want it smooth and clean, but still cinematic?
Yeah.
So you get to choose.
And again, having that flexibility as a consumer, I think is a big part. That way it's not just completely taking over, like Paul said. He's thinking it's going to take over his whole system and call it Skynet. But instead of taking over like all of the control, you have the control. You choose how much of the motion AI, how much of the motion blur you want to introduce back into that final rendering.
Yeah, and so if you'd like, we could go. We've got a couple of images that I wanted to show, kind of some behind the scenes work that we're doing.
So we're getting like an early insight.
Yeah. Like to be able to show you kind of at a per frame level, right? What's actually happening, right? And so, for example, if you look here, what we're looking at here are 2 different frames. Okay, so these are 2 frames in a movie that's at 24 frames per second, and these are adjacent frames. Okay, so this is frame 1, and basically 42 milliseconds later, this is frame 2, and there will be essentially 24 frames that happened, right? So 24 times at roughly 42 milliseconds each time winds up creating 1 second of video. So I'm going to basically show you. So this is what the motion interpolation algorithms need to do, right? They need to say, okay, this is my starting frame, and this is the next frame, but I don't need to do 24 frames in a second. I need 60 frames in a second. And so the job for any motion interpolation algorithm is to determine how to make the frame in between. Now, for simplicity's sake, we're just going to show an example here with a frame right in the middle. In realistic terms, there's more than 1 frame that is being created, and it's not necessarily right in the middle. So I'm going to show you what typically kind of happens in errors kind of situation, right? So I'm going to go back and forth a few times so you can kind of really see this. So let's start in the bottom right corner where this building is. You can see these vertical lines, this texture here in the roof. Okay, so if you look here, it might look okay, but this is what it looked like in the second slide, right? And so now when you look at it, you can see damage that the motion interpolation algorithms will cause, right? Because it looked like this in the first slide, looked like that in the second slide, so that the integrity of that structure is fine until motion interpolation gets involved, right? And you might think, oh, that's not really that big of a deal, but these are the types of things that happen in the background that cause these visual artifacts that will attract your eye and become distracting potentially in a movie. Right. And so this is the algorithm that we are currently working on, the result right here. So this is the in-between frame here. So you can see here that MotionAI has completely reconstructed this frame without losing that resolution and integrity of that image in that spot. Now let's take a look at another one. Let's look at above it. Okay, so the box above it, we're at the top box on the far right side. Okay, this is the first frame. This is the second frame. Okay, now look what happens in the in-between frame. Okay, it looks like it's kind of crumbled into pieces, right? So this is your first frame. This is your second frame. Why would the frame in between those 2 frames look like this, right? It shouldn't. Okay, again, this is just the complexities involved in trying to reconstruct these frames. This is what our motion algorithm is now doing right here. Okay, so this is the corrected frame in between. So instead of this, this.
Mhm.
Okay. So again, that's the first one. That's the second one. Or you can actually think of it as the first one, the third one, and what's in between. Okay. Let's take a look at a couple others. We'll look at the top box in the middle. Okay. So first frame and second frame. Do you notice the V kind of under the fin? Like again, here's the box,
Mhm.
right? So look kind of on the right side of that top box. You'll see like an upside down V. Okay. You see how it hasn't moved? So the dragon is moving. Okay. But that V is stationary as it should be. But motion interpolation may do this. You see how it shifted to the left? I don't have access to my mouse to be able to point it out, but can you see what I'm showing there?
Yeah. You have to make your monitor big. Not yours, but if you're watching.
So again, here's the V, upside down V, and it's solid in its integrity, still good. The in-between frame shifted now to the left, and it's happening on the left side as well. And remember, imagine what that would look like in motion, because the first frame would look like this, the second frame would be shifted, and then the third frame would look like this. So that's where you start to see these kind of nasty artifacts. And then this is how our latest algorithm that we're working on is rendering that frame. Okay, so you can see the V is back in its position, right? So like this, and then like this. And another one to look at is inside the dragon's mouth.
Mhm.
This one might be really hard on your monitors to see,
Yeah.
but look kind of near the bottom teeth, the front. See those three teeth on the bottom, the very bottom three teeth, right? First frame, third frame. The third frame has a halo, right? Kind of like a bit of a halo and some blurriness, and an extra kind of piece by that third tooth, right? Versus this is the cleaned up frame, right? And you can also see kind of near the top right corner of the box. Do you? Hopefully you guys can see this, but do you see that little piece that's kind of moving underneath the top row of teeth near the top right corner? So these are the types of things that are moving, and remember, this is sequential. So you have frame one, real frame two, and inserted frame at, let's say, 1.5. And if that frame inserted at 1.5 does not hold that same integrity between those original frames, that's when these artifacts come into play. Any questions at all about that?
I haven't seen any in particular to motion interpolation.
There's probably no way to like show a clip like this in real time versus flipping frames, is there? Or would it not work through the stream, perhaps?
Yeah, it's actually one of the things that we've really been able to enjoy, especially through our early years in COVID, is that we could show HDR tone mapping examples online. We could show highlight recovery, contrast recovery, and be able to A, B, and see the differences and have a good idea what they look like. But unfortunately, you're so dependent on perfect 4K 60 playback that we have found it very challenging to, number one, record it.
Yeah.
And also to then be able to play it back without stuttering and all that. So it's definitely the type of thing that's best looked at in person. And another reason for you guys to come out to MWAVE.
Yeah, dude. See it
Because
firsthand.
we will be showing it there like that. Now, Jonathan, you bring up a good point. One of the things that we have done is we have provided multiple demo options for MotionAI. And so we actually have the first way is an instant on and off, right? So you can push a button and see what it looks like at 24p, and click a button and instantly see what it looks like with MotionAI on. And it is incredible when you go back and forth to see what it makes 24p look like, right? Like we're all so used to 24p that when you see it kind of cleaned up, it makes it almost look like something might be wrong with the display at 24p. Ryan, you have any thoughts at all on that?
I mean, I've got two 42-inch C3s coming, Jonathan, if you want to see it in person for this exact reason, because madVR is one of those things that a lot of people think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, but in actuality, we try and be as transparent as possible. So if something's not right or you see something, we absolutely want to know about it. But in this particular case, because it's very difficult to showcase these things on one display without using things like frame blending, that's why I've got two displays coming, right? So that you can do one with Envy doing interpolated content, run it through a splitter, and the other one will just be at its native display without any type of frame blending or anything being done by Envy.
Yeah, and so that's a great way to do it. You know, to have two screens, of course, is the best. Not everybody has that option. We have another mode that we literally draw a thin line right down the middle of the screen vertically, and the left side has the MotionAI on, and the right side has it off. And that's really telling. Like there's a scene in 1917 where they pan across a bunch of trees in the landscape, and you could just see the trees are solid, and it gets on the other side of the line, and they just start shaking, right? So if anybody wants to take a look at this scene, for example, watch this at, I think it's roughly about the 1 hour and 2 minute mark. There's a couple of gentlemen speaking, and one walks away and the other guy's about to go march into battle, and the camera pans around to the left, and you'll be able to see, when you see those trees shaking, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And then just imagine that same thing, but with the trees in the background all perfectly, you know, in line without any type of shake to them. There's also some cool things like the opening credit scene from Baby Driver, where he's walking down the streets. Amazing way to look at the differences. Also, Deadpool is great because if you remember the opening, there's a lot happening that's kind of spinning, right, in slow motion. That stuff's turning around, and you've got this line. So credits are moving across the line and perfectly fine, and getting across the line and just shaking, right? So things like that are really neat to be able to see. And then we have another mode, which is also split screen, but that shows 50%, the middle 50% of the image simultaneously on both sides with it on and off. So provide a lot of tools for you to be able to really kind of dial it in, see how you like it, and also try to match, you know, the original if you want, and get something really cinematic, but at the same time, you know, by being able to remove that judder.
One thing that's really neat, I was just playing with this last night, just getting familiar with it, and the remote, Ryan had set it up to where one of the buttons on the remote, you press and hold it, and it pulls up that dividing line. So like you said, the left side is with it, and the right side is without it. Is that correct?
Yeah, left is on, right's off.
And then you hit it again, and then it changes to where I think you got split view to where, help me out, Ryan. You know the cycle through them.
Split screen is it's just going to have interpolation on one, none on the other. Then it doubles
the same
it.
image. Yeah,
And
so same image.
Then it doubles it. Then it mirrors it.
And
then it's
like inverted.
And then I think that's the last one.
Yeah. So anyway, so you physically can switch through these and see different ways of being able to compare. And so again, just kind of another tool to be able to figure out, okay, what works best for your situation? What settings do you like? And it actually kind of goes back to one of the questions I saw earlier. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Yeah, Supernova, he mentions, and pull your comment up here. Yeah, so he was asking, you know, is it hard to set up? And the good thing is you set it up, but then your integrator is going to set that up, calibrate it and everything. But then you have full flexibility to go in there and change those settings. And they can be temporary settings, or you can make them permanent settings. And so that definitely makes it really, really simple there. I thought there was one more that he mentioned. Oh, he said he should have bought the NZ7 instead of the NZ8 and bought an Envy to go with it. Yeah. So I think that was the, his thought on that, as far as, being able to change those and make those setting changes on the fly. So super, super cool.
Yeah. And Fred brought up a great question. Fred 215, thank you for this. He said, is this only good for projector setups? Actually, it's great for projector setups, and it's also great for TVs, wall products. As we mentioned earlier, Ryan and I were out at Dallas, Texas. Seems like 3 weeks ago, but I guess it was just a few days ago we got back. But it was really fantastic. We had it on the Samsung 146-inch TV, and dealers, so this was a dealer show, and they were really kind of just freaking out over how it looked. Like, one guy walked up to Joey Peacock, our senior sales manager, and he was from one of the largest integrators in Texas, and he said, "Hey, my buddy, he runs an integration company out in California. He's always talking about how great this device is. I've always told him I'm skeptical. He forced me. He said, you come out." And he looked at Joey and just said, "Convince me." Right. And Joey said, "Well, we're doing a demo. Come on in." And that demo, we didn't really even show NLS. We didn't show dynamic tone mapping, all these other great things that the product has been known for all these years. The main thing that we showed during that demo was the MotionAI. And it was about a 20-minute demo. We went through different clips and we did the split screens and showed him. When he came out, I said, "Well, did we convince you?" He said, "You had me in 30 seconds.
Wow.
And so this was the kind of reaction that we were seeing. And this was really fun for us because we have a small, probably about, a couple dozen, of our longer term dealers that have been working with it, providing feedback on it. And this is the first time we got to really see people's reaction in person. So that was really humbling and exciting, at the same time, to see this kind of come to fruition. But, kind of as Fred brought up, the idea is a lot of times with these brighter displays, the brighter and bigger they are, the more motion artifacts they will show. And so it can be even more important for, some of these wall type products.
There's a little shout out to you. Thanks, Richard, Ryan, and Joey, for supporting Elite 3 Pro at the Dallas Tola Expo.
Yeah, you guys are very welcome. It was great hospitality, great town, and an amazing show. And that Samsung Experience Center is, what do they have in there, Ryan? Probably 20 different TVs.
Oh gosh, no, it was way more than that. They had like 20 frames by themselves just showing artwork. It was insane. They had 2 full-on self-emitting walls. One was like a 120 or 130, and then one was a 146. They had some 100+ inch TV that was in there, like a 110, probably 20 65s by itself. It was everything that Samsung makes was in that room.
Yeah, that was pretty wild. And it's a beautiful facility. It was really set up well, and also gave Ryan a chance to carry an Envy up another set of escalators.
No.
You go.
It's not a show without Ryan carrying an Envy around like a football.
Really want to stop doing that.
Yeah,
maybe if I drop one, he'll stop having me do it.
Yeah, for sure.
That's also known as a CLM, career limiting move.
Oh no. Wow, man. Was that a threat? I think it was a threat, Ryan. He's saying be careful.
Ryan just wants you to do him the favor.
I'm just going to say, Rick, remember last time you said I'd have a career limiting move if I drop this? Here, you can carry it.
Wow. Nicholas, appreciate the super chat. He says, is madVR researching audio video calibration tools like we have for audio processing now?
Yeah, well, we actually integrate with Color Space and CalMan that are both excellent professional tools. It's a tool that all of our partners that we work with, ISF calibrators, use to be able to dial that thing in. And those tools are pretty wild. I don't know if you've worked with them. I know Orion's been working with them. The way that it works is essentially that you run their software on your laptop, and you give it Envy's IP address, and it'll connect to Envy, and their software displays all the patterns. So it's kind of like we work together, right? So we control the software, and you operate the software, and it talks to the Envy, and the Envy displays all the patterns, and it takes all the measurements, computes the calibration files, transfers that to the Envy, where the Envy stores that data and then applies it. Ryan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't think so.
Nicholas, appreciate the super chat, sir. All right. So we've got more questions. We also have some talk about the new Mark II. I know you're excited about that. So we came out with the Mark I, which was how many years ago? 5 years ago, you said?
They're about 3.5.
Okay. So 3.5 years old. And so now we've got a Mark II, the new version that just was announced, what, a couple months ago?
Yeah, it feels like it, but it was maybe
Has it been less than that?
3 weeks ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Golly, I thought it was a little bit.
Time is moving so fast, right? Yeah. We were excited. This is our first chance to show it in public at the TOLA Expo in Texas. We got some pictures. If you want to bring that up, we can kind of talk about what's new, what's cool.
Oh, that's the wrong one, right? Yeah, sorry about that. We have it's funny. Richard sent me 3 different documents. Like, man, we got lots of stuff we're going to show tonight. I'm like, all right, let's make sure this happens. If I got the right one. No, that's still not the right one. That's the brochure. I am not wanting to do that one. Yeah, it should be this one right here. Okay, I know what it was. There we go. Get my right controls. There we go.
There you go. Magic. So why don't you just kind of talk through this a little bit. Our first version of the Envy was in the stock case. We didn't have, when we got started, we didn't have the wherewithal to make the investments required to go through a custom engineering process. So it was nearly a 2-year project that we set out to meticulously design every nook and cranny of the case, engineer it from the ground up exactly what we needed, which involves everything from build quality, protecting it during shipping, ensuring longevity, cooling, and all that. So I'll talk about the case a little bit first. So this is an all 3mm aluminum case. There's no metal. The case it's hard to tell from this angle. We can tell a little bit in a moment, but the lids and the sides are actually just one piece. So it's really sleek, creates a modern design. As you look down the edges, there's no seams. The front plate's 20mm thick, black brushed anodized aluminum. The areas that you see here are actually much more understated than shown in this picture. But it is these are laser etched and engraved. So they have our every pixel counts slogan that you can see there, along with the madVR logo and the Envy markings. We've got a power button there with a really nice kind of tactile feedback click when you press it, power light around it. And then when we get to the view on the bottom, I'll come back to that power light in a second. We redesigned the cooling system from the ground up. This is using our Glacier X2 cooling system, which consists of the 340 millimeter fans, static pressure fans that you see here. Lots of good venting, as you see on the top. In a minute, we'll flip to the bottom. But as you can see here, these fans work in conjunction with two more 120 millimeter static pressure fans. If you could maybe go to the next view.
I'm multitasking. I'm answering some comments.
Oh, there you go. So there's a couple things to note here. As you can see here, that the venting on the bottom, that's another two more 120 millimeter fans. So we have 1, 2, 3 fans on the side, 2 on the bottom, 1 on the CPU cooler. So what's that? 6, and then a 7th for the power supply, which typically does not run under the load that we're usually putting on it. So you've got 6 or 7 fans all operating. And of course, a lot of people, if you're not really familiar with cooling, might be afraid when they look at the size of the venting and the number of fans. They may worry about, well, how quiet is this thing? It's whisper quiet. We have different cooling modes. So there's a different mode for example, rack. But if you have it in your room, you can put it on silent mode. And if you get 2 feet away from it, you can't hear it at all. That's under heavy load. Certainly, if you're using it with a projector, it just will go right into the background. The projector fan will be more overpowering for sure. While we're here, it almost looks like a screw, but if you look at the foot on the top left, if you go to the right a little bit, that's actually a toggle switch. So that toggle switch will turn off the power light. So we purposely designed the LED lighting so that it is bright enough to tell it's on when lights are on, but it's also still on the rather dim side when the lights are out. However, for those that, like Ryan mentioned, that
Nigel,
yeah, in the Christmas room, they put some black tape over the light. So now you wouldn't need to do that. You just can click that little toggle switch, and it will remain permanently off, even across power cycles until you flip that button again. If we to go to racking, if you remember those 4 feet we were just looking at, you simply just unscrew them with your hand. Just you don't need a tool. Just then put those in the box so that they don't disappear if you need them in the future. And then you should, you'll see here on the side, you've got these 4 screws in the front. You simply remove those screws and you add the rack gear that you see here and put those same screws right back in place. And then you wind up with your rack gears as you see here. The unit is 4U high. Which was something that we worked hard to do. The previous case was actually a little bit bigger, so it wound up requiring 5U in the rack. As far as venting and cooling goes, it's always best to have the Envy on top of something that runs cool. Great piece of gear if you've got a kaleidoscope in your rack is to rack the Envy on top of that because that is small, cool.
Yeah.
And the main thing is you just probably don't want to put it on top of like a hot amp where those fans on the bottom.
Class A amplifier would be bad news.
Right. You got it. So that's really it. And if your rack has fairly good cooling, you're probably okay to just insert it between other gear. And the heat that comes out of the top there should still escape just fine, even with that little 1/8 inch gap or whatever it is in between gear. So you don't need any kind of custom plate when this thing goes into a rack. It perfectly fills that for you space. The rack ears are custom made, as you would imagine, and finished exactly the same. So you have a matching finish with the front plate. Talking about cooling, let's take a look at the back of the unit. So the back is something that we're really proud of as well. We worked super hard on this. We wanted to provide not only the best cooling, but also design that really looked nice. And for those of you that are really technical, you might notice that the power supply is on the opposite side of where you would normally find it. So from this perspective, normally the power supply would be on the right side. The reason that we did this was because we wanted to, we did hundreds of cooling experiments to really design that whole Glacier X2 cooling system, which includes kind of some wind deflectors inside to bring air in and then angle it or direct it, to the right parts of the case. So really left no stone unturned. And as you can see here, this way, the 3 fans are on the right side where that serial sticker is on that side of the thing. Those fans are bringing air in directly onto the HDMI card and directly onto the GPU, which you can see there kind of where the output is. And so we found that this was actually a more efficient way to cool the unit than to have the power supply on that side, because with the fans on the other side, you're then bringing air and you're blowing it directly into the back plate of the GPU. And that's not really where the air best serves the cooling. So, those are the kind of attention to detail. You can see the fins on the back. We actually use 5mm aluminum on the back because we wanted those fins, even though they're fairly thin, to be strong. But you can see how open it is to provide that exceptional venting. That's also why it's probably not necessary in a decently ventilated rack to leave one blank U above it, despite that heavy or that large vent area on the top, because that air will make its way out of the back. You can also see the back plate here with the custom madVR logo. This is where your IR dongle and your RF antenna go for the remote control. And then your LAN port and a couple extra ports for supporting things like keyboard, which can be useful for setting up an Envy, like your dealer or you if you're hands-on, doing things like renaming profiles, that type of thing, or also powering like an active fiber cable. If you need USB power, you can tap into that from there. The other thing I should mention too is the remote control. We're currently still shipping with the Mark I remote control, but hopefully not too much longer from now, we will begin shipping our new Mark II backlit remote control.
Oh, nice.
A lot of people are asking for backlighting. We've added a couple more color buttons for more flex options, and we've provided all sorts of like innovative things. For example, I'm not sure if anyone else has done this before, but with full attention to detail everywhere, we actually have like a battery saver mode on the backlighting. So the backlight works differently if you pick it up and move it and don't use it, versus if you pick it up and move it and do use it. And these are all different kind of ways to program different features and functions into the remote by, pressing combinations of keys to let you change that. And finally, the other big thing that's different as well is that we have upped our warranty because of the extreme build quality, care, and attention to detail that's gone into the cooling and protecting the case. We're now offer a 5-year warranty on parts and labor on all new Envy MK2 units. And that's just massive compared to what else is mostly done in the industry. That's up from our leading 3- and 2-year warranties before. So that 5-year warranty is something that you can really be sure that we're going to stand behind and make sure that the investments that you make into the product, which are not small, are going to be well served into the future, to making sure that the Envy is a worthy centerpiece, hopefully, to your home theater and your rack.
Well, it's definitely beautiful, man. I love the design. I love the attention to detail. It's sleek.
Thank
Man.
you.
It's
Thank
sleek.
you.
I
No,
love the look.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's kind of funny that the rear is probably like my favorite view of the whole product. I mean,
Just turn it around and look at it from the back.
It's beautiful, as well. I don't think the pictures quite do it justice, but the rear plate is just gorgeous. And when we talked about, it's a shame. Like normally we have it up against up against the wall, like at these shows, right? And we even contemplated maybe having like a mirror. I think Ryan suggested for people to be able to see the back. So instead, we just kind of flipped it around for people that wanted to see it. But when you talk about like attention to detail, Michael, we actually have the screws are custom made for this case, because we wanted the perfect finish. Like there was no way to get the screws perfectly flush,
right,
with stock screws. So, and we're talking maybe like a 0.5 millimeter difference, right? And so instead, like we did custom molds and custom created the screws, the finishing touches. So when I say no stone left unturned, I mean it. We obsessed over this, and we hope that it shows.
Sure. Got a couple of questions that came in on the case. Weight, what are we looking at?
Weight is, the old unit was 31 pounds. The new one is 42 pounds, I believe, give or take a pound, somewhere in there.
All right.
Shipping weight is about 48 pounds, if I remember right.
Front logo, acrylic?
No, it's actually laser etched.
Okay.
So it's etched into the aluminum.
Mikey says acrylic with a backlight would be awesome. Some people don't like to see lights, though.
Lights are typically bad for home theaters.
Yeah, most of the time we try to hide those as much as we can.
Unless you're Macintosh.
Yeah. It's funny. Everybody kind of has their own taste. I mean, we really tried to, we really tried to make it understated, because that's what the majority of people like. But there have been people said, "Oh, why didn't you? It would have been cool if you would have done like your logo, because our logo, the 3 color pieces are red, green, and blue. Like that would have been cool, or lighting, or RGB lighting." So everybody kind of has their own,
absolutely,
kind of take on that.
Yeah.
Mikey, I saw your comment saying it looks sick. Thank you so much. That really means a lot to us. We're really humbled by that.
So Nicholas says, it looks like a PC.
Yeah, well, under the hood, it is a PC. There are other home theater products on the market that also share PC architecture that are very dominant in the marketplace. But we did go through great lengths to, make it look and feel like an AV, a true, CE, consumer electronic product. Like that custom backplate, I don't think that you probably would find that in other, gear. Normally what you would see there where that black plate is, where the madVR logo is, normally you would see like, keyboard ports and DB9 serial ports and, those, green, pink, and orange, audio jacks and all that kind of stuff. So we really kind of worked hard to, give the product an image that our customers could be proud of.
All right. So I don't know how much of this is available to talk about, but the question came up, so I'll bring it up. Mark Holbrook says, can you talk about what hardware is used under the hood? Is there anything that we're able to disclose?
Yeah, sure. I can talk about a couple things in specifics. And I'm glad he actually brought that up, because one of the things I forgot to mention was the fact that these are all premium upgraded components from the previous models. In particular, the Envy Extreme is now using the NVIDIA 4080 GPU. And, you know, if you guys have ever held one of those things in your hand, you know, they're about, you know, almost 13 inches long and a few inches thick and about 5 inches tall. In fact, it's so big, it would not even fit, physically cannot fit it into our previous case. And so, you know, one of the things that we did is we worked hard to ensure it would be well protected. And there's actually what we call a GPU cage under the hood, which is essentially like a vise that secures the GPU on all 3 sides and locks it down to the case onto a GPU stand that can also not put any pressure on the motherboard. And so, you know, there's a lot of things in place, not just to make it look pretty and to have high build quality, but also to provide a very functional purpose in protecting gear. So the Envy Extreme uses that 4080. The Envy Pro Mark II, we have not decided yet exactly what GPU we're going to use in there. We're going to wait and see what NVIDIA releases here in the next, hopefully, a couple of months. We'll be seeing what comes out there. So just the Envy Extreme Mark II is the one shipping now. We are using upgraded components. So, for example, we're using ECC RAM, which is kind of the best way to explain it is kind of like self-correcting RAM. So if you have any kind of, and what's really kind of special about this is I don't believe there's probably any other AV product on the market that might use ECC RAM. ECC RAM. It is typically used in like mission critical servers, server farms, professional workstations, that type of thing. And so just to help ensure the product's stability and operation, right? So those are the kinds of attention to detail that we went into on all the aspects of the build.
So question, Brian asked earlier, upgradability. So you've got 2 models, you've got a Pro, you've got an Extreme. Might be a good idea to kind of share some of those differences.
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of a 2-part question. Let's kind of take the upgradability part first. So the Envy Extreme is a paid upgradable. That continues with the Mark II. For the Mark I, largely because you cannot fit a 4080 GPU into the previous case, and just about every component changes in the Mark II Envy. We're doing those as a trade-in program. So customers that want to upgrade have the option to pay the upgrade fee and trade in their Mark I and get a brand new Mark II with a 5-year warranty. The Pro model, as we said, you know, when the product was released 3.5 years ago, and basically every day since, is that you know, the Pro model does not get upgrades, and it is, however, like the differences, if you want to know, kind of off the top of my head, and Ryan, let me know if I miss anything, but in a nutshell, the Envy Extreme gets MotionAI. It's exclusive to MotionAI. It also has our geometry control, which we didn't really talk about, but that allows you to fix and get an actually perfect square image, square tickers. You know, you kind of look like one side.
You mounted your projector crooked or something?
Yeah, it's very difficult, as everyone here probably knows, it has a projector, to get the screen and the projector perfectly square to one another. So you always have maybe kind of like a wonky corner, or that you're zooming out into the masking to try to hide or fix. So with the Envy, not only can you fix that perfectly, but you can also balance out things. So like tickers, sports, scoreboards, that kind of stuff, where it's just something so satisfying. I imagine that a lot of us here have a lot of OCD somewhere in us. And when you see it just perfectly even across the whole board, you know, relative to the screen frame, there's something satisfying about that. If you do anything with anamorphic lenses, I'm sure there's probably some people here that have anamorphic lenses. They're great lenses. They do cause barrel distortion.
Right.
Typically, people will zoom out to kind of hide the distorted ends into the masking.
Kind of mask around it. Yeah.
Yeah, you're wasting some pixels by doing that. But the other thing too is there's still a little bit. It depends how sensitive to it you are, but there's still a little bit of that looking through a bubble kind of view. So with the Envy, it just perfectly flattens out, gets everything square. And it's also great. Most people don't have curved screens anymore. We've seen some really cool curved screen images that way. So being able to do that is great. The Extreme also goes up to 5K, goes up to 8K, upscaling. One of the things we didn't talk about in MotionAI, which is also going to be huge, I know Ryan's really chomping at the bit to get a hold of this, is 4K 120. So being able to take, we're watching sports at 4K 60. We do have the capability to output, since we are HDMI 2.1, the only dedicated video processor on the market that has 8K HDMI 2.1 output. So we can do things like 4K 120. I believe that we're going to at some point do some experiments with 8K 48. There's some really kind of neat things that you can do. Even things like 72p, 48p, right, depending on the display's capabilities. So all that is Envy Extreme exclusive. Ryan, what am I missing here? There's got to be a couple other things that we're forgetting.
So while he's thinking about that,
Upscaling,
yeah, 8K
geometry
upscaling.
correction, faster check times for nonlinear stretch. The biggest one is hardware availability, which I think you touched on.
Yeah, the upgradability, the fact that you can upgrade.
No. Increased headroom for not using or not having as much throttling.
Yeah, so on our current roadmap is several AI algorithms, not just MotionAI. For example, the Mark II has about 100% more GPU power than the Mark I Extreme. And as you can imagine, the headroom in the Envy Extreme has a lot more than the Envy Pro. So that headroom allows us to do things like more features, right? So if you go onto our website, madVRenvy.com, there's a spec sheet that you kind of see what these upcoming algorithms are. That'll be AI based. So there's a lot more upcoming features as well that are exclusive to the Extreme. But the Pro will do things like the nonlinear strats, subtitle management, the amazing dynamic tone mapping, all that stuff in such a way that's virtually indistinguishable, from the Extreme. So very, very worthy product as well.
So Richard, you mentioned some of the new features you're looking to do is the 4K 120. Typically that's found with gaming, and some people had asked in the chat, is the Envy suitable for gamers? And right now it's really not, because of the amount of lag it introduces, correct?
Correct. So, one thing with madVR Labs and Ryan and any of the guys will tell you is that we're very transparent about what we're good at, what we're not good at. And so part of our secret sauce involves our latency and being able to look far into the future, right? And so we know, like we talked about, truly instant aspect ratio handling and all this other type of stuff, like motion handling. This requires advanced processing that has to take place before your eyes have a chance to see it to get the desired impact, including the dynamic tone mapping, being able to be really aggressive there and not get caught in a scene change where all of a sudden something's going to get blown out accidentally. Because of that lag, it's not ideal for gaming. Single player games, you can play on there. I know some people still like to play single player games on there because just the tone mapping, they really just like the way that looks through the Envy rather than through their display. But for competitive gaming, it's not ideal. For that, we do have a 0 latency pass-through port. And so Ryan can tell you a little bit more about the best way to set that up. But essentially, you can, if you have a second output or second input on your projector, or your display, you can run simultaneous through the pass-through port, and you can just simply switch inputs on your projector. Or otherwise, you know, probably Ryan doesn't want to go into it right now, but you can at a later time explain ways to use like 4x4s and other kinds of switchers to just switch completely around the Envy for gaming.
Yeah, so there's definitely some workarounds, but it's really primarily for, you know, movies and displays versus gaming. So just
yeah, movies, sports, you know, all your documentaries, pretty much anything you're going to be watching, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're into soap operas, I'm sure it'll do good with those too.
Yeah,
but probably not a lot of dudes here into soap operas.
You know, and then you've got
my
things
favorite
like,
genre.
You know, you got your auto lip sync.
I watch it with this face.
I bet you do. I bet you do. Jonathan, you've been super quiet. I know you probably have at least some thoughts. I mean, you've seen the Envy, you saw it at MWAVE last year.
Well, I've used the free version of madVR that's a little outdated at this point for quite a few years, and I've really liked it. I mean, we have some snake oil discussions on the show every once in a while where I kind of have to bite my tongue a little bit, and I don't think this is one. Like, this product is really worthwhile and good. Yeah, I mean, that's what I can say. I do enjoy this product, as far as even just the version that I have on my PC.
Jonathan's stamp of approval.
Hey, and we don't get that all the time. Jonathan, to tell you, that's what's funny. Somebody was saying, "Hey, Jonathan's not getting any screen time. Let him talk." I'm like, Jonathan has no problems asking the hard questions, you know, and that's great about him. And but yeah, that's super cool. So
I have a couple questions for you, Richard, that are on the side chat. Like, I'm kind of active in a Discord channel here, and they're asking some questions about like your IO card. So you said that there's a 4090 card for your graphics processing. When you're using it for a 4080, sorry. When you're using an IO card, what card are you using for that? Is that not something you want to share?
Are you talking about for the HDMI input?
Yes.
Yeah, that's proprietary and something that's best not to.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's just question was asked, so I thought I'd bring it up. And then latency was asked, specific numbers. I think you kind of, at least someone in the chat had mentioned 220 milliseconds on Mark 1 and a little bit better on Mark 2, you were saying.
Yeah, actually the latency should be the same on both, and somewhere around what's it, Ryan, 200 to
220. We do that intentionally because it gives Envy the time frame to look ahead, right? So it's not just processing, it's the ability to keep a steady lip sync delay. Otherwise, you're going to run into problems. The lip sync is going to constantly change. So that's there intentionally. It's not hardware limited. We use that for look ahead so that we can make the determinations and then time it so that things are changed on time every time.
That's cool.
Yeah, Jonathan's been answering a lot of questions in the chat. Appreciate it.
Other than that, maybe another thing I saw with Start was kind of cool. Like, they were mentioning that this would be great as an all-in-one processor situation. So you have audio solution as well as a video processing solution. And yes, it'd be top tier, it'd be expensive, but is that something that would be roadmap down the future? Or are you guys not concentrating on anything like that at this time?
Yeah, right now we're focused on our our current product line. Not really in a position to be able to talk about what may be coming down the road now that we just kind of fresh off of this product release.
Yep. And then one more question, I think, that was kind of on the side here. What's the OS behind it? Is it a Linux or a Windows kernel that's behind it?
It's a Windows kernel, Windows IoT.
So how does that work with like Windows updates and so forth? Have you had trouble? And this is just my side. Have you had trouble with Windows updates breaking stuff that you have to patch?
No, because we don't let anything update outside of the factory, right? I had my hesitation early on when we were designing the product, just from my prior experience in computers, whether that would be safe to do from a stability standpoint. My partner assured me that under controlled conditions, which is not letting a surprise update break a driver, that type of stuff, that the product would be very stable. And I don't know how much time you've had hands-on with them, but you can't tell in any way that it's a Windows-based product. You hit the power button, it comes on, it does its job. You hit the power button, it goes off, it does its job.
Good.
And very stable, yeah.
Very good.
One question I have is, and maybe this is, I don't know if it's a limitation or if it was a design choice, but most of my equipment in my theater room, I hit my harmony and it says, okay, power everything down. Envy pretty much just stays on because it's similarly built to a PC. You physically have to hit the button. Is there maybe an option for that? Is there a reason behind that, or
you can turn it off using the remote? You just can't turn it back on. And Envy will respond to wake on LAN magic packets, and meaning you can turn it on via IP control system. If your Harmony system is able to send a wake on LAN, it is more than capable of controlling it. It's just it doesn't have the ability to turn on using RF or IR. But you can turn it off.
Okay, gotcha. We definitely got some. You mind if we go through like some rapid fire questions over here in the chat?
Sure.
All right, let's hit them. What is the minimum projector price point that's recommended for madVR? We kind of talked about that earlier.
There is one.
I think we can benefit from a lower end a lower end projector as well as a higher end projector on up to the premium.
I mean, maybe don't put it on like a Magic Van, White Van Special, but
yeah.
I mean, that isn't one in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. I mean, we had some at your house that I wouldn't recommend. It was just booty to begin with.
Some that could double as a nightlight from light leakage.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Let's see.
I mean, that Ryan hit the nail right on the head, right? I mean, any capable projector is going to be benefited by adding an Envy to it. Even like these ultra short throw projectors.
Yeah.
I've already kind of been dropping some hints to my wife about replacing the family room TV with an ultra short throw.
Oh, there you go.
We'll see. I don't know if I really kind of want to go there.
Yeah.
I mean, but
just get you one of the big Samsungs, bud.
Getting the itch. Well, Ryan was supposed to help me disassemble the 146 and bring it back to the house, but that didn't plan out. I think he has it as his house.
No.
I saw Ryan with a bunch of suitcase and a bunch of grids.
No, the only thing that I was having to carry around was the Envy.
Funny. So LBM says, hi, gentlemen, what is the percentage of improvement for each unit from the Mark 1 to the Mark 2, especially with the GUI board? Looking forward to getting it. So is there like a rough estimate on how much percentage?
I think today you put the two next to each other, you wouldn't be able to tell which unit was which. The Mark 2 has approximately double the GPU power and headroom available.
So for future expansion, higher resolutions.
Yeah, future expansion is big, and as we start stacking up all these AI algorithms, right? I mean, you can only push a card so far, right? Like there's a certain amount of horsepower that's available before you run out. So the Mark 1 is still a very capable product. It's still current. It's still kind of like where our core development is taking place, and we continue to work hard to support that, but over time is where you'll see those differences.
Sure. Curtis says, all right, so this is on everybody's thought. It's like, okay, this isn't an inexpensive product for sure. And so is there any plan for maybe a smaller budget friendly one?
Well, I never say never, but
as of right now, no.
Don't look for any announcement tomorrow.
Yeah. I saw some other ones like, is there like a payment plan on this thing? And somebody recommend just go with your credit card if you need payment plans. So
yeah, and I think there are I'm not really kind of familiar with these programs, but I think there may be some sort of finance programs that some dealers are able to offer, not just on the Envy, but on their systems. So
let's see. DC says, why is it that when I adjust the nit value on the madVR Envy menu, the darker it gets?
you're telling Envy that your display is more light capable or less light capable. So you're changing when it is and when it isn't tone mapping. So if you lower the value of your peak nits, you're telling Envy that your display is less light capable. Thereby, it is going to tone map earlier, making your image potentially overtly bright. If you do it the opposite and you tell it it's more light capable than it actually is, you're going to make it darker. It has to do with when Envy is and isn't doing its tone mapping, which is why it's important to get that setting correct.
Yeah, and just to add to that, really what Ryan said is hitting the nail right on the head. At the end of the day, it really is not an adjustment that should be played with. Matthias likes to say, never lie to Envy about your peak nits.
Oh, funny. Yeah.
Right. So, in other words, some users, they may feel that, oh, I can get a brighter image if I use my actual nits are, this, but if I use this number, I notice it looks brighter and I like that better.
Yeah.
So he makes it a clear point that everything is, all the dynamic tone mapping, everything is color science based around that number. And if it doesn't have that number, it may not do an ideal job rendering the best contrast in bright and dark scenes. There are, however, other adjustments. There's something called a brightness preference that's in one of the menus that you can bump that up or down. So if you want to punch your image, it's going to make it a little bit more SDR-like, you can raise the brightness preference. Or if you want to make it a little more HDR-like, you can lower that. So there are ways to kind of accomplish that same thing if that's what you're trying to do by playing with that number. But ideally, like Ryan said, that number should be set according to what you get out of your $20 light meter and not touched unless you're using a bulb that's dimming.
Paul R says he has a 150-inch 16:9 Seymour screen. Will the Envy help my Sony 885 ES do blacks better?
Well, I think it'll help with rendering HDR better, right? So at the end of the day, the contrast at the projector, and Ryan, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well. But at the end of the day, the contrast capability of the projector cannot be changed by Envy in the range that it has. But it certainly can help make the best use of the contrast that's available.
Yes. So we can't fix the hardware sides of things, but we can fix the software sides of things. So you're limited by the native contrast that the display is capable of doing, just like you're limited with any of the capabilities resolution that the projector could do, as an example. So you can fix the software, but you can't fix the hardware. You need a better display to be able to do that, or a better spec'd out display, I should say.
Sure. What about, Nicholas says, is refresh rates or frames per second have any effect on overall performance with the Envy?
No, I mean, the Envy, Brian touched on this a little bit earlier, I think. The Envy is pretty agnostic. You send it any valid HDMI input signal, it's going to handle it the same way. I mean, there are ways to optimize things. For example, there's ways to optimize the setup of an Apple TV to use, the right ideal frame rate and HDR settings and all that type of stuff to feed the Envy. And on madVRenvy.com, there are setup guides that talk about how to best configure popular source devices and popular projectors for the ideal settings.
Mikey said, we kind of hit on this earlier probably, so we'll be real brief on this. Any frame limitations?
Well, 8K 60, I don't really know about that. I don't know if I've heard 8K 60 for whatever reason. My mind is saying maybe
we can up convert to 8K 60.
We can? Okay. 4K 120 we talked about earlier. We plan to add that to MotionAI. That's going to be really super for sports to be able to do that. And even things like 8K 48, which I mentioned earlier, we hope to be able to do that on displays that are capable 4K 72, 4K 48. Like, these are all things that are possible as long as the display can handle them.
I mentioned this in the chat as an answer, but I'll go ahead and put it up here. Supernova Moore says, when you buy these new, is installation hard to calibrate? And my thought, or my suggestion was, your installer, your dealer is going to install that, set it up, calibrate it. But the great thing about it is that it's super simple to go into the menu, and there's actually different menus in the remote. There's like, I was telling Richard behind or earlier before we started, I really appreciate the fact that you've got designated buttons that take you to different kind of sections. You hit one and it pulls up all your HDR settings. And so you can easily turn things on or off or adjust those. Hit another one, it goes into kind of like the main menu settings. You hit the OK button, it brings up all your incoming signal settings. So you can see if you're getting SDR or HDR, super handy. And then you've got 4 circles, colored circles. And I think you mentioned with the new Mark II remote that's coming out, this backlit, you'll have even more options there. In the back end, in the software, you can actually go in and assign those buttons. So if you press one button, let's say the red circle, it'll do one thing. If you press and hold it, it'll do another. And you've got full programmability, I guess, of what you want those buttons to do, which is really, really handy. Again, you can adjust some things on the fly using those buttons.
Yeah,
Did I do decent on that?
Yeah, no, you got, I mean, that's you nailed it. In fact, people do love those buttons like you're talking about. That's why, you know, everything in the Mark II was customer feedback driven and dealer feedback driven. And that's why we added 2 more colored buttons. So we had red, green, yellow, and blue. If anybody wants to take a guess in the chat what the other 2 colors are that we added. Let's see if anybody can guess that. That should be the type of thing you should be able to guess. Yeah, any of our super techie guys.
How much of a video file are you?
I'm not.
Tell us. I'm waiting in the chat. Somebody type into the chat the new 2 colors.
That's what I'm thinking, black and white.
Oh, that would be interesting, but
I don't know.
Not black.
Where's the new remote? I don't think they've launched it yet.
It's not out yet.
Yeah, so we're shipping right now the previous remote and the new remote. Once we start shipping, will be sent to everyone. It'll start shipping with the new Mark IIs, and everyone that already got theirs will get the free remote.
So here's a good point to the menu structure. DC says the best menu I've ever seen with detailed explanation. And I love that too, because anytime you put like you select an option in the menu, down at the very bottom, it kind of gives you a little description. Okay, what is this really doing? And then it even gives you some recommendations like we recommend here. But again, it's your machine. You feel free to adjust it. We just kind of recommend leaving that as this is neutral, or maybe I mean, Ryan likes to go, what's the one? Not extreme.
Insane.
Insane. One of the options is insane. And Ryan's like, that's the one for me, baby. But it looks good on the Envy though. I think that's the contrast recovery.
Highlight recovery.
One of them.
Highlight recovery.
I think you said it to insane. I'm like,
we have our black bar detection speed is also variable.
True.
And ludicrous speed.
Yeah,
ludicrous.
Yeah, I got called out. Black isn't really a color. Well, true, but it'd be hard to see that even on a backlit remote, I guess.
Yeah, right. It was just
all right. So, are you going to let us in on the secret? So, what are the 2 new colors? We're not really getting guessing.
I'm surprised that we didn't have any takers on that. So magenta and cyan, of course.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
To complete the RGB CYM
color game.
Yeah.
Usually that's in the print world though. When you get into
it is. So it is.
I wouldn't have thought of that either.
Calibration is pretty popular. If you ever work with the color gamut, you know, those are kind of like your primaries and then your secondaries. Like at least in the video world.
CPU, is that disclosable?
Yeah, probably better not, but it is a very capable CPU. Although that being said, really the CPU doesn't have a whole lot to do. It's all
More
it's all in
graphics,
the GPU. CPU is doing things like, moving frames and some things in and out of memory, but it's largely all about the GPU.
Ton has a great question. Is a software licensed version ever considered, like Adobe Creative Cloud?
I would say never.
Okay, fair enough. Benjamin says, does this need network connectivity, or can you run it completely off the network?
It's a great question, Benjamin. You can run it completely off the network. To update it, you can connect it, do a check for updates, and download it. And Michael, I don't know if you had a chance to see the way the firmware updates work.
Yeah, we did. Like literally was super fast.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? We like to say it's one of the fastest firmware updates in the business. My Apple Watch takes like 30 minutes to update.
Yeah, it literally is like bloop, bloop, bloop. Like, okay, we're done.
Done in literally, a matter of seconds, depending on what it's updating. But yeah, you can keep it offline. It doesn't need to be connected. If your dealer is going to provide some tech support, one of the nice features is with your prior permission, you can connect it to the network, and your dealer can log into your unit, remotely control it, set it up. You probably, Michael, got the experience that with Ryan probably logging in and helping you. So you have full control. You could see the video that's coming in. If you say, oh, I don't know, this looks a little like this, or can you help me make it sharper? Or it's really good for NLS adjustment. Right. Like if you're like, Mom, I'm kind of, if you tell your dealer, well, look, I want to move the ticker off and get this and that, but I'm a little intimidated. I don't want to touch anything. Dealer can just go in while you watch, do everything. And they could be like, keep going, stop, save, and done, right? Without having to drive out and meet with you and find a time that works for your family and for the dealer.
We even used my FaceTime. We were like, he was able to see where he's at and just pick it up. I'm like, yep, you're good right there.
Right.
It's definitely handy to be able to do that remotely and program it. So super flexible there.
Right.
Let's see. We got probably just a couple more questions and we're going to wrap it up. I don't know if this is maybe relevant. Benjamin says, how does this product differ from NVIDIA's RTX video enhancement and DLSS frame generation that you would get on a PC as a source?
Yeah, that's not something I'm familiar with, but if you want to send that into support, we'd be happy to get you an answer on that.
Okay.
What was the question?
It's right on the screen at the bottom. I haven't pulled it off yet.
Oh. Okay. Yeah, probably not best answered here.
Yeah. Okay. I think most of the other ones we have answered. Mikey says, I think his question would be, would integrate audio processing. We kind of talked about that earlier. He'd love to see that capability, possibly all-inclusive one. But if you guys are complaining that you needed a second mortgage, think about it. If we start implementing, or they start implementing audio processing too, then of course that's going to increase the cost of the unit as well. Man, yeah, I think we hit pretty much all of them.
We ran the gamut.
Dude, man, holy cow. I think this has been the longest live stream that was with, one of our partners for MWAVE and exhibitors. And so we're super excited to have Richard and the team of madVR at MWAVE. If you guys are interested, man, we would love to have you join us. We're going to be at Kansas City Convention Center, July the 14th through the 16th. You can get all the details, all of the experience rooms that we've got set up. We're going to be talking about more of those in the days to come as far as details of what's going on in each one of the rooms, but you can get a lot of information on the website. We'd love to have you join us. It's going to be an awesome weekend.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of you guys so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun. It's really great. There was so much to talk about. I mean, MotionAI, we could send a session on its own. The Mark II, we could spend a session on its own. I mean, and so just trying to work through this. So We appreciate all the time, and special thanks to your amazing audience.
Thanks, man.
For all these great questions and being so engaged. That makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I love my guys, man. They're intrigued, and and whether or not we can afford it now, there may become a time down the road that they might be able to implement this in their system. So it's still great information to know. And like I said, if you're going to be at MWAVE, you're going to be able to see this firsthand and go, do I need that for my setup? Do I not? Do I want to save up for it? DC says, tell Madchi we mentioned him. Super cool, man. Well, guys, I hope y'all have an incredible week. Richard, thanks so much for being on the show. Ryan and Jonathan, as always. Jonathan, you're going to need some water because you talked a lot tonight. And, and Ryan, you need to smile more, man.
I'll
I'm
be
gonna buy
happy.
you a t-shirt. I'm gonna buy him a t-shirt for MWAVE that says "Smile More."
We should say, it's $20 if you can make me smile or something like that.
Oh man,
Ryan's gonna win that game show. Where remember that game show, Make Me Laugh?
right? Yeah.
If you
Make
can
me
crack
laugh.
Ryan, you're gonna
Stop
go to the finals. You know the way to Ryan smile. The way to Ryan smile through his stomach. Get
There
him
you
like
go. Feed him good.
cannoli, some sort of good dessert. See, look, there he goes already. He's already smiling.
He's already thinking. He's like, "Hey,
If this is what you're considering me smiling, I guess so.
We'll take
that's
it.
an improvement from earlier." So, anyway, guys, I hope
Thanks,
you
guys.
hope you have an incredible night. We'll catch you next Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and y'all have a great week.